What happened to this local resident is still hard to explain. He had just started his simple walk in the forest when he suddenly saw a strange, metallic-looking object lying on the forest floor. As he edged closer, he suddenly stood in front of a real-life rocket. Strange enough, as is, but then he looked inside. Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The hiking trip in the forest started out pretty normal. Lars had parked his car on the forest edge and quickly checked his supplies for the day. "This is going to be great," he said to himself as he took his first steps into the forest. But things quickly took a strange turn. As he crossed a small stream, Lars noticed something unusual in the distance. At first, he thought it was a rock formation, or perhaps the remains of an old wooden shelter, but as he moved closer, it became clear that this was something different. "Damn, that's blinding," Lars said as he moved a few branches of a nearby tree to move closer to the mysterious object. One thing was clear. Whatever caused this reflection did not belong in the forest. Curiosity tugged at him, so Lars altered his path, stepping carefully over roots and through patches of undergrowth. This thing. By the time Lars was just a few meters away, he realized how massive the thing was. It stretched along the forest floor, half covered by fallen leaves and mud. Its surface was metallic, gleaming faintly despite the dirt. It looked like something from a science fiction movie's leak, cylindrical, and entirely out of place. Lars stopped and stared. The shape was unmistakable now. This was no ordinary object. It was a rocket. For a moment, he could only stand there, frozen. His mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. Rockets belonged to launch pads and space stations, not forests. The thought of how it got here, or why, sent shivers down his spine. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The rocket was damaged, with deep scratches running along its surface. It looked like it had fallen from the sky and landed here, far from where it should have been. One end of it, the base, had massive Engines 3 dark nozzles with burned fuel residue still caked on the inside. Lars walked around the rocket, inspecting it from every angle. The more he saw, the stranger it became. There were no markings, logos, or numbers to indicate where it came from. Then Lars noticed something else. On the side of the rocket was a piece of metal skin that looked loose, like a flap of aluminum foil halfway peeled back. It wasn't large, but big enough to see a hollow space behind it. Lars simply couldn't resist and crouched down, his fingers brushing against the edge of the flap. The material felt weirdly cold, even though the temperature outside was pleasant. With a gentle tug, the flap lifted. A small gap appeared, revealing a hollow, dark space inside. Lars hesitated, glancing around the forest one last time. Then, unable to resist his curiosity, he ducked his head and crawled into the rocket. The darkness inside the rocket was absolute. He shuffled forward on his hands and knees. The floor beneath him felt odd, slightly spongy, unlike the hard metal he expected. The narrow tunnel opened into a larger space. Lars stood, his head just brushing the curved ceiling. The air here felt heavier, and the faint smell had grown stronger. He fumbled in his bag, pulling out his phone. Turning on the flashlight, he swept the beam across the walls, revealing complex-looking charts and many buttons. Lars tried to turn some of the buttons, but not much happened when he did. This thing was toast. That much was clear. While Lars was focused on the many buttons and rotators that amounted to nothing, there was a heavy movement going on outside the vessel. Trucks were driving backward, and more people were surrounding the crash site. But somehow, Lars didn't notice anything. He was too caught up in his curiosity bubble. The rocket suddenly jolted violently, and Lars toppled onto the spongy floor, barely catching himself with his hands. He scrambled back up, clutching the smooth wall for support. The faint gasoline smell intensified, but a low rumbling sound quickly drowned it out. Lars strained his ears and then froze. It was unmistakable, a deep roar of a truck engine. Panic set in as the rocket lurched again, this time tilting slightly. Lars stumbled forward and grabbed at a metal railing to steady himself. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, his voice echoing in the hollow chamber. But deep down, Lars already knew the answer to this question. The rocket was moving, and it was doing so with him in it. Whoever operated the truck had lifted the rocket onto its truck bed and was transporting it somewhere, but where? Lars moved quickly to the metallic flap he had crawled through, his fingers trembling as they gripped the edge. With a sharp tug, he pulled it open. Lars hoped he could still get off the truck and disappear into the forest. But when the metal flap was fully lifted, Lars's stomach dropped. The forest was gone, replaced by a blur of trees and asphalt flying past. The truck was speeding down a highway, the rocket secured on its bed. Lars's mind raced. If he jumped now, he'd be seriously hurt or worse. Escape wasn't an option, not at this speed. He pulled his head back inside, shutting the flap behind him. "I'll wait until it stops," he told himself, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. The rocket shuddered with every bump in the road, tossing Lars against the wall multiple times. Lars gritted his teeth and eventually found a corner to sit in, hugging his knees. Every vibration, every jolt of the truck beneath him sent waves of anxiety through his body. He glanced at his phone, the battery already dangerously low, and sighed. The truck finally slowed down after about an hour, the longest one of his life. Lars felt the vehicle roll to a halt, followed by muffled voices outside. He crawled back to the metallic flap and pressed his ear against it. Through the thin layer of metal, he could make out a conversation. One voice, gruff and authoritative, mentioned an ID check. Another voice spoke a number, followed by a clicking sound. After the click, the second voice confirmed clearance, and moments later, an iron gate opening was heard. They were entering a secured terrain of sorts, but Lars had no idea where it was or who it belonged to. The truck started moving again, but this time more slowly. Lars's unease deepened. The truck eventually stopped again, this time indefinitely. Lars's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he heard the truck driver step out again. They were clearly inside a building because there was no wind blowing past the rocket's exterior. The truck driver's footsteps grew more silent, but others took their place. People were inspecting the rocket, could hear their voices circling the vessel, sometimes just inches from where he entered. Holding his breath, Lars crouched low, praying no one would look inside. After what felt like an eternity, the voices began to fade. Were they gone? Was it safe to look? When the area outside grew quieter, Lars dared to open the flap again. He peeked out cautiously, scanning his surroundings. His jaw dropped at the sight. He was inside a massive warehouse, the ceiling towering high above him. It was so large that entire airplanes could fit inside, which actually was the case. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across rows of strange equipment and vehicles. "What is this place?" Lars whispered. Climbing out of the rocket, Lars landed softly on the truck bed and crouched low. His eyes darted around the open space, searching for anyone who might see him. Nearby, workers in uniforms were busy inspecting another large piece of machinery. No one seemed to notice him, so Lars took his chance and jumped to the ground, landing awkwardly but managing to keep his balance. Sticking to the shadows, Lars moved quickly toward an open door he spotted along the far wall of the warehouse. He slipped through it, quietly closing it behind him. The room he entered was small and dimly lit, with shelves stacked high with boxes and tools. For the first time in what felt like hours, Lars could let out a long, shaky breath. He leaned against the wall, trying to gather his thoughts. The quiet moment didn't last long. Lars's mind buzzed with questions. Where was he? Who were these people? And why was the rocket here? His instincts told him he had stumbled into something far bigger than he could comprehend. He wanted answers, but first, he needed to find a way out of this place without getting caught. Lars scanned the room and began rifling through papers on a nearby desk. The documents were filled with technical jargon and diagrams he couldn't decipher. Frustrated, he opened a drawer and pulled out a map marked with coordinates. Before he could study it, the door creaked open. Two people in lab coats stepped in, halting their conversation when they saw him. One gasped and the other shouted for help. Panic spread through the warehouse. Lars's instincts kicked in, and he shoved past them, rushing through the doorway and back into the warehouse. He spotted a sunlit doorway at the far end. Sprinting toward it, he barely made it halfway before two security guards blocked his path. They grabbed him, roughly, ignoring his protests, and dragged him past machinery into a small, windowless room. They shoved him into a chair and stood by the door. A man entered, calm but watchful, and sat across from Lars. He asked Lars to talk. With little choice, Lars explained everything, the rocket in the forest, climbing inside, and ending up here. The man listened carefully. When Lars finished, he asked if this had all been accidental. Lars nodded and insisted he meant no harm. The guard stayed silent while the man considered his words. Lars asked what this place was. After a pause, the man explained. Lars had entered a government-funded space program facility. The object he found was a detached part of a rocket that had returned to Earth, fully intact, a rare and unexpected event. Normally, such parts burn up in the atmosphere. This anomaly made its quiet recovery essential. The facility's work was classified, and secrecy was critical to avoid public attention. The man reassured Lars that their work wasn't shady but highly sensitive. He asked if Lars knew where he was. Lars shook his head, explaining he hadn't looked during the hour-long drive. The man studied him closely before deciding he believed him. After a long silence, the man said Lars wasn't in trouble. What happened was an accident, and it was clear he hadn't intended to interfere. He would be taken home, but blindfolded to protect the location. Lars agreed. A guard stepped forward with a blindfold, and Lars allowed them to tie it on. He was led to a vehicle, calm now, and began the quiet ride back. The journey was uneventful. An hour later, the car stopped, and the blindfold came off. Lars saw his own car ahead, right where he'd left it. A guard handed him back his belongings with a simple nod. "Drive safe." Lars climbed into his car, trying to process what had happened. It was an experience that felt like it belonged in a movie, not his own life. Yet, here he was, the only witness to a secret operation hidden in plain sight. When Lars finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in his car for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. "What a day," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. He knew he'd never forget what he'd seen, but promised to keep it a secret. Later that evening, Lars sat by his window, staring at the stars. He wondered about the rocket's journey, the people at the facility, and the projects they worked tirelessly to protect. He felt a strange mix of awe and gratitude. Somehow, he had been part of something extraordinary, even if just for a moment. Though life returned to normal, Lars often recalled that day in the forest. He knew he could never tell anyone, but that didn't matter. It was his secreta memory of his life's strangest, most fascinating day.